Marcus Webb hadn't eaten in 2 days when he spotted the sign. It was handwritten in thick black marker on a piece of torn cardboard, duct-taped crookedly to the windshield of a rusted-out 1987 Ford pickup parked at the far edge of a salvage yard on Route 9. The letters were uneven, the cardboard already curling at the corners from last night's rain. Truck for sale. $195. As is. No phone number. No name. Just a price and a condition that told you everything about what you were getting. Marcus almost didn't stop. He was moving on instinct that morning, the way a man moves when his body is running on nothing but habit and stubbornness. His shoes had a hole in the left sole. His jacket had been donated twice before it reached him. The last real meal he remembered was a bowl of soup at the church on Millbrook Avenue, 3 days ago now, maybe 4. Hunger had a way of blurring time. He had $200 left in the world, folded into a tight square and tucked inside his right shoe because his jacket had no pockets he trusted anymore. He stopped walking. He looked at the truck. It was ugly in an honest way. The rust wasn't just surface, it had worked its way into the wheel arches, bubbled up along the door panels, eaten through the lower edge of the tailgate like something living. One side mirror was snapped off at the base. The windshield had a crack running from the lower left corner all the way to the middle, a long diagonal scar that made the whole glass look tired. The paint had been blue once, maybe navy, but the sun and the years had faded it into something closer to gray regret. And yet, Marcus stood there on the gravel shoulder of Route 9 and felt something shift inside his chest. Not excitement, not exactly. More like recognition. The way you sometimes look at something broken and see yourself looking back. He had been sleeping under a tarp in an empty lot 3 blocks from the river for 6 weeks. Before that, a shelter that closed in November. Before that, a room in a boarding house that he lost when the roofing job dried up and the money stopped. He was 41 years old. He had worked since he was 15. He had never once in his life asked for anything he didn't believe he could eventually repay. And now here he was, standing on a gravel road with $200 in his shoe and a hunger headache pressing behind both eyes, staring at a truck that nobody else wanted. He found the owner inside the salvage yard office, a heavy-set man in his 60s named Dale, who barely looked up from his newspaper when Marcus knocked on the open door frame. The transaction took 4 minutes. Dale accepted the cash without counting it, handed over a key on a plain metal ring, and said 2 words, "She runs." Marcus nodded like that was all he needed to hear. Maybe it was. Getting the truck started required patience and a particular sequence: turn the key, wait for a clicking sound, then turn it again, that Dale demonstrated once and Marcus memorized immediately. The engine caught on the 3rd try, coughing out a small cloud of dark smoke before settling into a rough, uneven idle that felt less like a purr and more like a conversation with itself. The heater didn't work. The radio face was cracked and dark. The passenger seat had a spring pushing up through the vinyl that you'd only discover if you sat on it wrong. Marcus drove it slowly, carefully, the 6 blocks to his lot. He parked under a streetlight, habit, from the weeks of learning which corners stayed lit and which went dark after midnight. He turned the engine off. He sat in the silence for a long moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, and let himself feel something he hadn't allowed in a long time. He felt like a man who owned something. It sounds small. It wasn't. When you have nothing, absolutely nothing with your name on it, the weight of a key in your pocket changes the way you carry yourself. He didn't have a plan yet. He barely had a destination. But he had 4 walls made of metal and a roof that kept the rain off, and in that moment it felt like the beginning of something he couldn't quite name but could almost see. He ate the last of a pack of crackers he'd been rationing for 2 days. Then he started checking the truck. It was practical thinking at first. He needed to know what worked, what didn't, what might fail on him in the middle of nowhere if he tried to drive any real distance. He tested the door locks. He opened the glove box and found it empty except for a dried-up pen and a folded gas station receipt from 2017. He felt along the sides of the bench seat for anything left behind by whoever owned it before. He checked under the floor mat on the driver's side. Nothing but rust-stained metal and the ghost of old mud. Then he moved to the dashboard. He wasn't looking for anything specific. He was running his hands along the underside of the dash, checking the wiring, making sure nothing was hanging loose that might short out or catch heat. His fingers found the glove box again, but this time he felt further, deeper, past where the box ended, and found a seam. A clean, deliberate seam cut into the dash paneling, not a crack or a gap from age, but an actual edge. Like a panel that had been fitted there on purpose. He pressed it. Nothing. He pressed the corner. It moved. The panel was small, maybe 6 inches by 4, and it swung inward on a tiny catch that someone had installed with real care. Hidden behind it was a shallow space, dark and dry, insulated by what looked like a folded piece of chamois cloth. Marcus reached in slowly, the way you reach toward something when part of you is afraid of what it might be. He pulled out a package. Oilcloth, dark brown, wrapped twice and held together by a rubber band so old it had gone brittle and snapped when he touched it. He sat in the yellow light of the street lamp and unfolded it carefully, the way you open something you understand might matter. Inside was a handwritten document. A deed. The paper was thick and cream-colored, the kind used in official recordings, and the handwriting was careful and deliberate, the writing of someone who understood that words on paper outlast the people who write them. It described a parcel of land in Dickson County, Tennessee. 14 acres. With a well. With a creek boundary on the eastern edge. Beneath the deed was a title, old, expired in terms of vehicle registration, but traceable, the kind a lawyer could work with. And beneath that was a letter. 3 pages, folded twice, in the same deliberate hand. The first line read, "For whoever needs this more than I do." Marcus sat completely still in that cracked, rusted, $195 truck on a dark lot 3 blocks from the river, and read that letter from beginning to end without moving. Then he read it again. By the 3rd time through, his hands had stopped shaking enough to hold the pages steady. Outside, a car passed on the street. A dog barked somewhere 2 blocks away. The streetlight hummed its constant hum. The world continued its business, indifferent and ordinary, completely unaware that something extraordinary had just happened inside a broken-down 1987 Ford that nobody else had wanted. Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the oilcloth with the deed and the title. He held the package in both hands for a long time. He was not a man given to dramatic declarations or grand internal speeches. He was a man who had grown up understanding that life moved in one direction, forward, and that you moved with it whether you were ready or not. But sitting there in that truck, with those papers in his hands, he allowed himself one quiet and complete thought. Something just changed. He didn't know the full shape of it yet. He didn't know what the land looked like, whether the well still worked, whether the deed would hold up, whether any of this was as real as it felt. He knew none of that. All he knew was that a man named Earl Dutton, a name written carefully at the bottom of a 3-page letter, had hidden something precious inside a truck he'd sold for almost nothing, and the universe or fate or plain dumb luck had placed Marcus Webb on the gravel shoulder of Route 9 on a cold morning with $200 in his shoe and enough stubbornness left to stop walking. He slept in the truck that night. Not under the tarp. In the seat, reclined as far as it would go, the oilcloth package resting on the dash where he could see it every time he opened his eyes. He slept better than he had in months. And when the sun came up and touched the cracked windshield and filled the cab with pale, cold morning light, Marcus Webb sat up, looked at those papers, and started making a plan. Marcus didn't wait for the world to confirm what he already felt in his bones. He was up before sunrise, the oilcloth package on the dash exactly where he'd placed it the night before, untouched, real. He picked it up and held it the way you hold something that hasn't fully revealed itself yet, carefully, with both hands, giving it the respect of your full attention. The deed was still there. The letter was still there. Earl Dutton's careful handwriting was still there, patient and deliberate, waiting for whoever came next. Marcus was whoever came next. He had no phone. He'd sold it in October when the roofing work stopped and the boarding house landlord needed 2 weeks up front to let him stay another month. That month had come and gone, and so had the phone, and so had the room. But 3 blocks east of his lot was a public library that opened at 9, and Marcus had spent enough mornings there to know exactly which computers had the fastest connections and which librarian, Miss Patricia, 50s, reading glasses on a beaded chain, would let you print 10 pages for free if you asked politely and looked like you genuinely needed it. He was at the library steps at 8:53. The first thing he searched was Dickson County Property Records, Tennessee. The second thing he searched was Earl Dutton. What came back on that second search stopped him mid-breath. A brief obituary from a small Dickson County newspaper, dated March 2021. Earl James Dutton, 77, retired farmer, no surviving immediate family. Private burial. No service. For sentences that described a man's entire life and somehow managed to say almost nothing about who he actually was. But Marcus already knew who Earl was. He had 3 pages of it in his jacket pocket. He printed what he needed: the property record confirmation, the obituary, a list of legal aid organizations in Tennessee with phone numbers, and folded everything neatly into his jacket alongside the oilcloth package. Then he sat at the library computer for another 20 minutes, completely still, thinking through every step of what came next. He was methodical by nature. Years of physical work had trained him to assess a job before he touched it: look at the whole structure first, find where the weak points are, plan your sequence. He brought the same discipline to this. The weak points were obvious. The deed was handwritten, not filed through a county recorder. The title was expired. There was no will in the package, no notarization, no official transfer of ownership on paper. What he had was evidence of intent. What he needed was someone who could turn intent into law. He called the first legal aid number from the library's phone. They told him to come in Thursday. He said he'd be there. Thursday was 4 days away. Marcus spent those 4 days the way he had learned to spend uncertain time, usefully, quietly, without panic. He found day labor through a construction crew foreman he'd worked with before, clearing a demolition site 2 miles from the river. 3 days of work put $60 in his pocket, enough for a week of real food and a bus ticket he could hold in reserve. He kept the truck parked and walked everywhere, conserving the gas that was already in the tank. Every evening he returned to the lot, sat in the driver's seat, and read Earl's letter again. Not because he'd forgotten it. Because it steadied him. Earl had written it in the voice of a man who had lived long enough to stop being afraid of honesty. He'd written about the land, 14 acres his father had cleared by hand, a well dug in 1959 that had never once run dry, a creek that ran cold even in August. He'd written about his decision to sell the truck cheap and hide the deed inside it, believing that whoever was desperate enough to buy a $195 rusted Ford had more claim to a fresh start than any relative who'd shown up twice in 10 years asking about the will. He'd written, "I don't know who you are. But I know what it means to need something real. This is real. Take it and do something with it that I couldn't." Marcus had read those words 11 times by Thursday morning. The legal aid office was on the 4th floor of a building downtown, the kind of office that was always slightly too warm and slightly too loud, with plastic chairs lining the walls and a front desk staffed by a young man who typed very fast and made eye contact with no one. Marcus waited an hour and 15 minutes. He didn't mind. He had learned that patience was not the same as passivity. Patience was the active decision to stay ready while the world moved at its own pace. The attorney who called his name was a woman named Claire Okafor. Mid-40s, natural hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She shook his hand with the grip of someone who respected your time from the first second. He laid everything on her desk: the deed, the title, the letter, the property record printout, the obituary. She read without speaking for 8 full minutes. Then she looked up. She said, "This is unusual. But it's not impossible." Those 5 words opened a door that Marcus walked through without hesitation. Claire explained what she needed: a title search, a probate inquiry to confirm Northwest contested estate, a survey confirmation on the acreage, and a filing with the Dixon County Recorder once everything checked out. She told him it would take months, not weeks. She told him there would be moments when it looked like a wall and turned out to be a door. She told him she would waive her fee entirely because she had been doing this work for 19 years and she knew the difference between a case and a calling. Marcus thanked her in a way that used very few words and meant everything. The months that followed moved the way real change always moves, not in a single dramatic moment, but in a long, accumulating series of small confirmations. The title search came back clean. The probate inquiry confirmed Earl Dutton had died intestate with no filed claimants. The survey matched the deed description down to the creek boundary on the eastern edge. Each piece of paper that landed on Claire's desk was another stone laid in a foundation that Marcus could feel solidifying beneath him even when he couldn't yet see the full shape of what was being built. He worked the whole time. Day labor, then a steadier position with a landscaping company that didn't ask too many questions and paid every Friday. He saved with the discipline of a man who understood exactly what money was for. He found a room at a boarding house on Clement Street, $12 a night, shared bathroom, one window facing a brick wall, and he slept in a real bed for the first time in months and felt the specific, quiet luxury of it every single morning. On a cold Tuesday in February, 4 months and 11 days after he found the package behind the dashboard of a rusted 1987 Ford, Marcus Webb stood on 14 frost-covered acres in Dixon County, Tennessee. The land was real. He stood at the edge of it for a long time without moving, just breathing the cold air, listening to the creek he couldn't yet see but could already hear somewhere through the bare winter trees to the east. The well was exactly where Earl's letter said it would be, capped and waiting. The soil was dark and dense when he crouched and pressed his hand into it, the soil of a place that had been resting, gathering itself, waiting for someone to come back to it with purpose. He built a small market garden that first growing season. Nothing grand, 4 raised beds, a modest irrigation line from the well, crops he researched carefully and planted with the same methodical attention he brought to everything. He sold at the farmer's market in town on Saturday mornings, learning the rhythms of it, learning which customers came back and why, learning that people didn't just buy vegetables, they bought the story of where the vegetables came from and who grew them. He told his story simply and without drama. A man who needed a start. Land that needed a purpose. A stranger named Earl who believed in the idea of passing something forward to someone who could use it. People responded to that. They responded deeply. By the second year Marcus had expanded to 8 beds and a small greenhouse. By the third year he had a proper farm operation, not large, but serious, and 6 people on his payroll, most of them pulled from the same system of shelters and day labor lots that had once been his entire world. He knew exactly who to hire because he knew exactly what it looked like when someone had the discipline and the hunger but not yet the opportunity. The truck sat restored beside the barn. He had done the work himself over 2 winters, grinding the rust back to clean metal, laying primer, painting it the original navy blue that it must have been when Earl first drove it off a lot decades ago. It ran perfectly now. Strong and quiet and reliable, the way things run when someone has taken the time to understand them properly. The $195 receipt was framed and hung on the wall inside the barn door, where Marcus passed it every single morning. Sometimes he stopped and looked at it. Not with sentimentality, exactly. More with the particular understanding of a man who knows precisely where his story turned, the exact moment, the exact price, the exact corner of Route 9 where he almost kept walking and didn't. Earl Dutton had hidden something precious inside a broken truck and trusted the universe to deliver it correctly. The universe, for once, had been paying attention.